What's up, everyone? I'm Scott,
And I'm Jason.
and you are listening to Liquid Carnage, my friend. Holiday week, short week. You are in Mexico for
Sí.
America's birthday,
Sí.
and I am working. So, hey,
Bebo
everyone
más
wins.
cerveza y tequila.
Ah, yes. That reminds me of the one time we went down to Mexico together.
Yes.
Surprised that we got back, to be completely honest.
Well, and it's still pretty early. We're recording this early, but I could be in jail by the time this actually hits press. So if I am, I'm expecting Liquid Carnage to come and bail me out.
Well, you do get one free phone call. So, actually, I'm not sure how that works in Mexico.
You know
So-
what? I don't know either. I've heard that the Mexican jail system is actually not great. So
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if $1,000 would get me out of jail. I do find it odd. I do find it odd that there's a justice system in Mexico that rewards bribes being taken and being given.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's just a weird concept. Oh, just give them $50 and they'll let you go.
Would you consider Mexico a third world country? I mean, what defines a third world country? Is it basic, like certain economic growth and revenue and resources?
Surprisingly, I don't think it does. I think that because you notice that there's no second world country.
That we know of.
Well, no, there's no. I don't think there's a definition that's been established for a second world country. You were either first world or you were third world. And I think the designation had to do not necessarily economically, but first world countries were kind of in the power game during the World War II and stuff, and third world countries were not. I think I would definitely be open to being wrong on that and being corrected. So maybe that we could put a shout out to our listeners to come up with a better definition. But I do believe that it's a designation that they use to separate countries that were in the fold and countries that were not.
So one can argue that when the first and third countries collide, that's when second world countries are born.
Maybe.
So this is what it's like when worlds collide. Shout out to Powerman 5000. Their biggest single of their career, When Worlds Collide.
Okay, and I never heard of that band, so.
You've never heard of Powerman 5000?
No.
You have never listened to any of my stories, then?
No, I probably have. I just don't know. I wouldn't. You know what my problem is with music is I know it when I hear it, but I don't know who sang it. I don't know when it came out.
Well, we can't all listen to Neil Diamond like you do, so.
Or Shania Twain, or not Shania Twain, Miley Cyrus.
I know.
Or Hannah Montana. Yeah, I get you.
I get it.
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question because Mexico has a pretty large population for a country that's not so big. They have a pretty large population. In fact, isn't Mexico City one of the largest populated cities in the world?
It is very
like 25 million
overpopulated
people or something like that. I mean, it's a pretty populated
city. It's massive.
So,
see, and it's interesting when you talk about Mexico City too, because we have all the travel bans on it, but then you watch like the travel specials, like all the different things they have for restaurants and culture and everything that goes on in Mexico City. It's like this feels weird that everyone says, or all the travel safety things say, don't go to Mexico City because of X, Y, and Z, and then you turn around and the travel channel has all the reasons you should go to Mexico City, X, Y, and Z.
I find the same thing. I've heard great things about the city Guadalajara, and I would love to go there, but I've also heard that it's a very not so safe, city.
Well, there's a lot of countries that are issuing travel warnings and travel bans on America because of all of our mass shootings lately.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm not talking third world countries. I'm talking like France. I think England's put out warnings. There's Canada has put out warnings about coming to America.
I've always thought that when people talk about guns, right? When they talk about the idea of guns and we've got to protect our rights, I always have to lean back to the question though: is do you trust every single person that has a gun? Do you trust every single person? Because I sure don't trust every single person with the right to carry a gun. And the worst part about life is, you can go from being a good person to being a criminal person in the split second.
Oh, yeah, it just takes one bad moment.
One bad moment, one bad emotional letdown, one bad, loss of judgment. And you can go from being a perfectly good law-abiding citizen to a criminal like that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Which, and it's so funny because, we talked about this a little bit in pre-production. I had just finished listening to the book, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
A classic.
Have you ever read the story, or have you
It's
ever?
been a very long time.
Listen, okay. Well,
I
never read the story. I kind of knew loosely what it was about, but I never really knew, the particulars. And I'm finding as I listen to books, what my preconceived notions of the books are based on, people talking about it or societal understanding, and what the book actually talks about, sometimes are very few and far there's a wide distance between what my thought of a book was that I haven't read in a societal explanation to what it really means.
Excuse me. Yeah, okay. I get with you.
And, for those of you who have not read the book, but the storyline, that basically it's set in England in the 1800s, and there is a man who is committing crimes throughout the city, but the police can never catch him. And it turns out that the Dr. Jekyll is a scientist who ventured the hypothesis that inside each and every one of us, there are basically two people, a good and a bad. And he felt that you could separate those two parts of a persona out from each other, and you could have two different people working in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so he came up with a concoction of chemicals and potions to transition from the good Dr. Jekyll to the bad persona who he calls Mr. Hyde. Now, in and of itself, it kind of like, okay, that's kind of where that's what I thought the story was about, right? That there was this conflict. But as I finished reading the book, I realized that the premise of the book was for Jekyll, it was almost like he wanted to separate out the bad person so that he could experience bad without getting caught. Like, it was almost like I want to unleash Mr. Hyde, let him do all the bad things that I've always dreamt about doing, but society and my own control has stopped me from doing bad things. Yeah. But if I let Hyde do all those bad things, when I turn back into Dr. Jekyll, no one will know, I'll be able to get away with that.
Yeah.
And it just got me thinking, do all of us have that kind of wish that, man, I wish I could do something bad without getting caught? If I knew I couldn't get caught, would I do something bad?
I think that's a question that everyone has at some point in their life. And I think the answer to that is easily, at some point in time, we've all said yes to that. Like, if you knew you could get away with something without being caught, why wouldn't you do it? It's almost it's like committing the perfect crime. It's giving into your id,
And yet, then the next question is, then why do we only do good because there are laws saying that we'll get in trouble if we don't?
No, I think that's a morality thing. I think inherently we know the difference between good and bad, and you can't always be good and feel okay about what you're doing. It's sometimes you just have to break bad, and sometimes you just have to go in that direction just to, justify why you do the good things in life.
Okay, interesting. Okay. Because I thought to myself that if I could release a bad person to do bad things, I would be hesitant to think that I would want, as the character in the story did, that I would want to do those bad things. Like, there's nothing inside of me that says, man, I wish that I could, commit a crime and just get away with it.
Yeah.
So I wondered, is that because I'm just, that the laws have made it so that I won't break the law because I don't want to go to jail? Or if I really had the opportunity to not get caught, would I do that thing or that action? And I don't know. That's tough.
That's a fair question. And I'll be honest. I think given the opportunity, if we were all told that you could do one thing against the law and one thing only, and you would never get caught or would never be held against you, and I think depending on what that one thing is, most people would do it.
Well, and I mean, we've talked about this a couple episodes ago. What was against the law and bad 5 years ago is now legal, and no one thinks anything of it. You
Yeah,
know what
I mean,
So
times change, things change. There's evolution in thought, in society, and you can't keep the world in a 1950s era vacuum where it's all crew cuts and poodle skirts, and everyone's home for dinner at 6, and you go to the sock hop on Saturday night where you have a couple pops, and if you smoke a cigarette, you're a bad boy. It's not like that anymore, and it's evolved, and you have to be okay with that evolution.
Well, and how many people are not, right? Like how many people want to go back to the way it was? Because in their minds, they think, oh, it was such a simpler, easier time.
Yeah.
And yet when you look at it from a reality standpoint, it had its own problems then too. We just have a frame of reference now to say, oh, there are things happening now that never happened 40 years ago. But that doesn't mean that 40 years ago there weren't issues and problems that we thought, man, I wish I could go back another 20 years.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that comes down to people can only understand things based on their own level of understanding.
Okay.
So if you truly believe the world was a better place 70 years ago in the 50s, and politicians didn't lie, they were honorable, and prices were what they were because we were out of a war and we were thriving, they don't want to admit that everything that's happened because of that, the consequences, I guess is the best way to put it, have led us to where we're at now. And it's not a bad world. It's a different world. And I think if you don't want to change, you don't want to evolve, that becomes part of the problem. And that's kind of where Jekyll and Hyde is a great morality tale. And you'll hear that phrase a lot, a morality tale, because it's what you define as right and what you define as wrong individually is completely different than what I view it as or what the EP views it as. We could have the same basic beliefs, but once you start getting into the nitty gritty, there's gray areas in there all along, and being able to separate that and then, do that bad thing and not be caught, that's subjective. What's that bad thing to you versus what's that bad thing to me?
There was one of the questions that I had as I was listening to the book is, how was Hyde not recognized as Jekyll? You know what I mean? Like, how did, in the book, no one ever knew that Jekyll and Hyde were the same person, right? But I realized that when at the end, when they're explaining what was happening, Hyde was always in Jekyll. When he released Hyde, Hyde was weaker. He was smaller. He was more deformed. And the way that Jekyll described it was almost like the muscle of me had atrophied. And so the powerful me as Jekyll had this alter ego that I never entertain, I never give power to, I never give any action to. And so when Hyde came, he was shriveled, he was smaller, he was deformed in his face. And I thought the imagery was just really powerful, that it would make sense, right? If you keep it, like if you never work your arms out, but you work out every other part of your body, your arm is going to look shriveled compared to the rest of you.
Yeah.
So that kind of, it helped me understand how he was able to not look like each other. But what happened was, as Jekyll gave more power to Hyde to act and do things, Hyde got stronger and stronger and stronger and started to take over Jekyll's life to the point where Jekyll could no longer control Hyde.
Do you remember that movie Split with James McAvoy?
No, I've heard of it, but I never watched it.
Basically, he plays a character that's uh, schizophrenic, has multiple personality disorder,
Yes.
and it's interesting when you talk about being shriveled and looking smaller, but you're still the same person. It's just that personality. It reminds me a lot of that movie Split, where McAvoy played a variety of people within that one role, and there is a definite difference in presentation for each different role. Like you could see who was about to speak just based on the way he was holding himself in that movie. So it's very interesting because it's a theory that goes way back, further back than Jekyll and Hyde too. I'm sure it's that if there's more than one personality in you, they can present very differently.
Interesting. Yeah. So in the movie, as he transitioned between each of the personalities, he carried himself differently in each of the
Yeah.
personalities. Like one would be very meek, one would be very aggressive. Kind of, is that what you're
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah.
Yeah. One would
Oh,
be feminine, one would be, straightforward. It just depends. Like you could tell just by the presence, the facial expression, uh, the difference in it. And I can see what the author of Jekyll and Hyde is doing with that by presenting Hyde as a much smaller man, at least initially.
yes. And what was the author, Robert Louis Stevenson's the author, in case anyone wants to look up the book. But one of the things I really liked how he did it is he described how Jekyll lost control of Hyde, where he normally in the beginning, as soon as he took the potion, he would go back to being Jekyll and he would just, be fine. But as Hyde began to gain strength and gain control, it was harder for Jekyll to keep Hyde inside. Like Hyde would just come out on his own. He didn't need to have the medicine to switch out of each of the characters. And it got me thinking, isn't that how it always starts? Someone who tries drugs for the first time, they're in control. Then they try it again and they lose a little bit of control, and they try it again, they lose it. And then it gets to the point where the drug begins to control the person, not the other way around.
Well, I think especially when it comes to a story like that, it's as that persona gains strength, as it gets a bigger grip on your personality, because that's obviously a more submissive side of Jekyll's personality initially, but sometimes those submissive sides or personality traits are only submissive because they've never been validated. And once they get that validation, they get to a certain point, their own id uh, gives them the power to overtake the, I guess, normal personality, the main personality, and that's when you have a shift in consciousness, almost.
Interesting. Did you ever watch the movie Primal Fear?
Yeah, with Ed Norton. Yeah,
Yeah. Remember at the end at the big reveal?
yeah,
It's like, well, wait a minute. Which one are you? Are you the good or are you the bad?
yeah.
And it kind of goes right into what you're talking about. We just think automatically that, who we see, like who you and I talk to every day, every week when we do this, are we talking to the real person who we are? Or are we talking to the actor inside of us? That's maybe you're talking to the part that I only show you for the 35, 45 minutes we talk. And then I go to being a real jackass after we hang up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I'm not. I mean, I can tell you that I'm not, but
those are traits of yours I've often thought about over the last 17 years. But
yes, I know. You thought, man, is that the real Jason? Have you ever met someone like that where when you work with them, they have one personality, but when you go out in a social setting, they have a totally opposite personality?
oh yeah,
Have you ever dealt with someone like that?
oh yeah, oh yeah.
It drives me nuts. It drives me nuts because I'm thinking, I don't like you at work. Yet if I were to hang out with you socially, I really enjoy your company. Why can't you just be the same at both?
Why are you the way you are? Yeah, I get it.
Like I've always been
Yeah,
very blessed that who I am in public and who I am in private is pretty much the same. There's
yeah.
no alter ego. There's no, I do something, I think that would be a horrible thing to live with, having an alter ego like that, where you have to keep that part of you hidden. And, and especially back in the criminal elements that we're talking about, I'm sure that happens all the time, right? I mean,
Well,
that,
we joke about it amongst our social circle with our buddy ex intern JP. It used to be when he would drink, and if he drank enough, his alter ego Keith Stone would come out.
yes, exactly.
And JP was a very quiet man, as in he doesn't say much. But when Keith was out, you knew he was out because he said what was on his mind and thought we should run this place.
Yeah.
You
And,
know,
I mean, you hear it all the time. Oh, man, do not give me tequila.
yeah.
Why? Oh, tequila, someone's getting hurt. I'm getting in a fight. So we deal with Jekyll and Hyde every day
Oh yeah.
in our lives.
I mean, we all have that aspect of our personalities too, where something can just drive us past that point where we just have to snap, or it's we have tequila or the wrong alcohol can just put us on that path of just self destruction, and we don't care who's in our way. It's a different trigger for everybody, but I think the overall arching theme of Jekyll and Hyde is that we all have this in us. And yes, this man used a potion to bring it out of him, but if we don't understand ourselves and work to find balance in both sides of our good and evil personality, the angel and the devil, one will ultimately overtake the other, and you can only hope it's the right one versus the wrong one.
Well, do we have to have an alter ego as a human? Do we have to have one?
I don't think we have to, but I think it comes naturally. I think there's a little bit of Walter Mitty in every single person.
If you can help me understand, what does that mean?
Did you ever see the movie or read the book? I think it was the case of Walter Mitty, or
Okay, no,
it's a Ben Stiller movie. It was a Ben Stiller movie from about 8 or 9 years ago.
okay, and
where
okay, go ahead.
he played Walter Mitty, was a man that he was an ordinary man, but he came across as very meek, but he had all these delusions of grandeur in his head and all these fantasies of him doing these exciting things that would get him the things he desires, the girl, money, fame, but he's always too afraid to do it until he finally said enough was enough, and he did the things.
Interesting. Yeah, the psyche is kind of a funny thing. I mean, all of us have greatness and all of us have weakness inside of us. And how often does the weakness prevail over the greatness?
Yeah.
Frankly, for most of us, weakness stops the greatness or holds it back.
I agree. I think it's a very common element in our society where one weak moment can derail months of progress or work. This is where they talk about discipline in life. And discipline in life prevents those weak moments from happening.
Maybe that's why in today's world, so many people can look at something that I would call morally wrong and they have no problem accepting it or even doing it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're more than willing to let their hide come out a little bit more than I do.
Well, it's also the age difference in the way they were raised in society too. I mean, at 51 years old, almost 51, sorry.
Almost 50. Yeah, that's right. Almost 51.
You're set in your ways. You're right and you're wrong. And there's a little deviation from it, but ultimately your belief system in what you want, who you are, is set. Someone that is 21 years old, 30 years your junior, completely different because they were raised different.
Well, okay, so because I could also say too that I know what's right or wrong for me. I know that when I've done things that go against my comfort, my safety, my happiness, those things I consider bad. I don't do them, right? I don't do them. For example, last week we talked about, getting in a small confined submarine or going to the top of Mount Everest as things that we don't do for our happiness, that someone else does them. I'm sure for right and wrong, it's the same thing. Some people love the thrill of drugs or love the thrill of gambling. Even if it's detrimental to them, they can handle it. They like it. They enjoy it. I've learned in the 51 years that when I do that kind of behavior, more times than not, bad things happen.
I guess, yeah, right. I guess what I'm getting at is ultimately we can have the same basic premise of beliefs with someone from a different generation. And I think we do, being good to each other. But how we get to that final destination is different from everybody. It's different for everybody, especially generationally. So if you have a certain belief, not to kill people, and this 21-year-old person that you're talking to, just for example, also has that same belief of not to kill anybody, how you go about making sure you don't kill anybody throughout life is up to your own decisions, but you still have the same basic moral belief, right?
I would hope so. I would hope so.
But how you go about it might be completely different from that younger person, just because of the way you were raised and what you've experienced.
I've watched enough documentaries about serial killers to know that they don't just jump into killing massive amounts of people. They usually start off slow, start off small, start with animals, then they start with, the pets, they kind of build that up over time so they get stronger, more comfortable, more confident in it. And then we see them after they've killed 40 people and said, holy shit, this guy's a monster. Well, it didn't start that way, right? I mean, they slowly built into it. So
it's the evolution.
I really like the book. If you haven't read the book, I'm finding, and I don't know if when you read books, if you find this too, that what your preconceived notion of what, like Frankenstein, the story of Frankenstein, I had a preconceived notion of what Frankenstein was about. When I got to read the book, there was so much of the book that I had no idea was part of the story of Frankenstein.
Yeah, it's all very interesting.
All very fascinating that's, we have corrupted it, not corrupted. We've molded the story to make it more entertaining. But if you just read the story by itself, it's a pretty fascinating story too. But yeah, this Jekyll and Hyde, I'm glad I read it. I'm glad it came across my way. And I can tell you that I could relate wholeheartedly to the concept that in each and every one of us, there is a bad side that maybe would love to come out and play, but never does because we keep it in control.
Self-control is the moral of the story.
That's right. Let Hyde be the learning that you need to keep it in control. Otherwise, it goes down fast, buddy.
There's a great way to end this conversation. So, as we wrap up today's show, what do you find morally objective that someone else might have a difference in opinions in? We want to hear about it. Hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. I'll let Liquid Carnage. The EP, we're coming to visit him in the next couple of weeks, so he needs ideas on how to keep young children entertained in the Denver metro area. So hit him up with great ideas like the zoo, baseball games. He wants to hear about it. Liquid_EP on Twitter and the Instagram.
This is just a ringing endorsement to always keep your mind open, always keep your mind reading, studying, learning.
Never stop learning.
Because, you can pick up, I have not read one book that I didn't pick up something out of, something that some other person gave a thought to. And for me, the greatest single waste that we put in this earth is we don't prioritize exercising our minds more.
That is fair.
Expanding our minds. So I'm glad I read the story. I hope that if you haven't read the book, I probably ruined it and told you the whole episode, but it's still kind of a fun read. It's a very quick book. It doesn't take very long. So I highly recommend it.
Listen, that book's been around for about 130 years, if not longer. So if you haven't read it by now, it's okay.
It was written in the 1880s, so I think it's been around for like 150, 160 years. So it's
you don't have to yell spoiler alert. Everyone's had plenty of opportunities to read that book.
That's right.
That being said, Jason, take us home.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. We always appreciate you. That was Scott.